For decades, Sweden was known for its open and welcoming immigration policies, gaining a reputation as a humanitarian champion where accepting immigrants was central to its identity. However, in recent years, this has shifted. Today, public opinion has turned against further immigration. The Swedish government acknowledges that the management of this issue has failed, prompting a radical change in immigration policies. But what led to this change? Why is Sweden now reversing its course after decades of openness? And why did it struggle to manage this issue effectively? Until the 1940s, Sweden had very few immigrants and was a largely homogeneous country. During World War II, Sweden became a haven for refugees from Nazi-occupied Europe. But by 1945, only 2% of its population was foreign-born, and immigration remained tightly regulated. However, since the late 1970s, Sweden radically opened up, accepting people fleeing wars and totalitarian regimes from all over the world, from the Eastern Bloc to dictatorships in South America and the Middle East. Over the years, these policies were occasionally restricted when numbers got too high, but the overall trend was clear. Then came the European migration crisis. As instability in the Middle East grew, more people from Syria and Iraq began heading toward Europe, joined by hundreds of thousands from Afghanistan and Africa, fleeing danger or seeking a better life. At its peak in 2015, Sweden accepted more refugees per capita than any other European nation, taking in 160,000 people, equivalent to 2% of its population. Today, over 2 million people, or 20% of Sweden's population, were born outside the country, making Sweden one of the most diverse nations in the world. Former Prime Minister once stated that Sweden accepts immigrants and doesn't build walls. However, this is no longer true, as Swedish leaders now express a very different stance. In 2022, the Swedish Prime Minister from the traditionally pro-immigration Social Democratic Party declared that the integration of immigrants in Sweden has failed. This failure, he said, has led to parallel societies and gang violence, prompting the need for the country to reevaluate its beliefs and make tough decisions. This major shift reflects how Swedes' views on immigration have changed in recent years. According to an annual opinion poll, the majority of Swedes now want their country to accept fewer refugees. The number of people who feel positive about immigration has dropped by 20%, now less than half. And 73% of Swedes believe that the integration of immigrants has been unsuccessful, a higher percentage than in any other European country. In other words, the Prime Minister's statement about failed integration was a public acknowledgement of the sentiments held by most of the population. But why do the overwhelming majority of people think that Sweden has failed at integrating immigrants? The most frequently mentioned concern is criminality, specifically a surge in violent crime that Sweden appears to be experiencing. The main concern about immigration in Sweden is criminality, specifically a rise in violent crime. In recent years, Sweden has seen unprecedented violence with gang wars, shootings, and bomb attacks. According to the Swedish National Police Chief, 2023 saw the most violence in the country's history. This issue is sensitive, but it's hard to ignore that many gangs involved in drug trade and arms trafficking consist of people from immigrant backgrounds. Immigrants are roughly 3 times more likely to be involved in criminal activity than native Swedes. However, the issue is more complex than just crime rates. While Sweden is sometimes depicted as crime-infested, it's generally still safe, with crime rates comparable to the European average and much lower than in most of the United States. Crime dominates headlines but doesn't directly affect most Swedes. The Prime Minister pointed out that Sweden is now a tale of 2 countries. The first is the safe, peaceful, and progressive Sweden, where most native Swedes live, with low crime, unemployment, and poverty. The second Sweden consists mostly of immigrants, with higher unemployment and crime rates, language barriers, and teenagers joining gangs due to limited opportunities. This divide shows where integration failed, creating 2 separate worlds within one country, divided by origin, class, education, language, and safety. This situation is problematic for both native Swedes and immigrants, who find it hard to transition from one Sweden to the other. Sweden's integration struggle stems from several factors. First, the sheer number of immigrants made integration challenging. Over 2 decades, the immigrant population doubled as Sweden accepted more immigrants per capita than any other European country. This was complicated by Sweden's humanitarian approach, accepting mostly low-skilled immigrants from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who need asylum the most, but have the hardest time integrating. In a highly developed economy like Sweden, where less than 5% of jobs are suitable for people without any qualifications, low-skilled immigrants naturally struggle to succeed in the job market and consequently to integrate into society. While this would be a challenge for any country, Sweden made it even harder by adopting a soft approach. Instead of emphasizing integration into Swedish society, It focused on preserving immigrants' own cultures and languages in schools and public institutions. Though this approach seemed superior at the time, in hindsight, it likely further isolated the immigrant population from the majority of Swedish society. Since last year, Sweden has been led by a government prioritizing immigration reform and making significant changes. It is now much harder to obtain asylum as a refugee, and there is a crackdown on people living in the country illegally. Sweden is also restricting low-skilled labor immigration and now requires integration, such as learning the language, as a condition for long-term stay and obtaining welfare benefits. As a result, Sweden's immigration policies are now radically different from just a few years ago. The country, once known as a humanitarian superpower, has changed significantly, and for now, it seems that old identity isn't coming back. Now, I'm curious about your thoughts on Sweden's current situation and its future. What are your thoughts about it? Please let us know in the comments section. For more such videos and hot topics, check out our next video and don't forget to subscribe.